So I'm going to talk to you about my adventures with visualizing my medical history. And I have a few slides that have some voiceover for reasons that you will soon understand. So when I was 13, I was sitting at the family room table with my family, laughing at something my brother had said, when my mom looked at me and said, "Why are you making that face?" I said, "What face?" I ran to the bathroom, and as much as I tried to smile at myself in the mirror, I could only grimace. So I was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which is an autoimmune disease that causes weakness in voluntary muscles. And it affects me mostly in my face. So I'll have a weak smile. Sometimes my voice gets tired when I'm talking for long periods of time. I get droopy eyelids, and sometimes I get double vision that causes me to wear an eye patch. So in 1998, I had a flare-up of double vision that caused me to start taking a drug called prednisone, and I've been taking it ever since. Prednisone is a steroid that suppresses my immune system, and it keeps my symptoms under control, but it also has some pretty nasty side effects. And for me, one of the worst side effects has been problems with my guts. And last fall, my gut problems felt out of control, so I decided to try and find a new doctor to help me kind of figure that out. So I found a doctor, and I made the appointment, and I realized I had no idea how to start telling him my story. I had jumped around, seen a lot of doctors, lived in a lot of different places, and I didn't have easy access to my medical records. But by trade, I'm a user experience designer, and my job is to make things easier to understand and to simplify the complex. So I decided the best way to tell my story would be to create a timeline. So I started with pencil and paper and just taped some pieces of paper together and drew a line from birth to present day and just sketched in those times when I felt very good, which I indicated as high on the graph, and very bad, which I indicated as low on the graph. And I did, again, all of this from memory. I really remembered those highs and those lows. And I also indicated those points in time when I had taken antibiotics or had a spider bite or really anything else that I felt was important for my doctor to know. And again, this is not a perfect science, but I was surprised at how quickly my graphs started to look very rich and robust. So my next step was to put everything into Adobe Illustrator, and I used a peach color to indicate guts and a blue color to indicate weakness. And I overlaid my graphs on top of each other, and I added some notes. And then I printed everything out, taped it together, and got ready for my doctor visit. I was very excited, very hopeful that this would help me communicate and tell my story. So I arrived at the doctor and laid the timeline down, and I used my finger to walk him through my story, and I pointed to those highs and those lows. And as I was talking, I could see that he didn't seem too interested. He seemed maybe a little skeptical. He tolerated me, and when I finished talking, he just kind of went off in another direction. And, you know, I felt a little sad about this. I had put a lot of effort into this graph. But at the end of the visit, you know, I asked him, how did that go for you? Did it help you? And he said, yeah, sure. It helped me understand the big picture. So now a word
After that visit, I put the timeline PDF on my iPad and took it to a few different doctor visits. Some had a similar reaction, not too excited, while others were very interested in engaging with it and zooming in to try and find connections and discover trends. I learned that doctors are very busy and they don't want to have to take the time to learn how to interpret all these different styles of graphs that patients bring to them. But they told me that when the graph is simple, uncluttered, and easy to read, it does help.
So what else did I learn? I learned that I felt more in control. Just by visualizing my symptoms and seeing how they interrelated, I felt a sense of understanding about my condition and about my symptoms. I also had a much easier time organizing and telling a more coherent story to the doctor. It helped me remember everything I wanted to say, and it really helped prevent me from rambling, which can be a problem. Looking at my timeline in more detail, I saw that antibiotics were probably making me sicker. I had been taking them to help with my gut issues, but every time I took them, it only helped me for a short period, and then I would have this steep decline. So seeing that on my graph made me stop asking for antibiotics. I also saw that bad guts and weakness seem to go hand in hand, and this just helped me to understand if I'm having a bad gut day, I can probably expect to feel some weakness. So that's just...
I found out that August is a hard time for me. In August of both 2009 and 2011, my myasthenia flared up and my vision went completely double. The first time I had to increase my prednisone dose, and the second time I decided to just wait it out for a few months. So this past August, I was really careful about getting enough sleep and keeping my stress low. I realized this visualization could potentially help other patients like me, and that gave me the courage to talk about my idea and to talk about my illness publicly for the first time ever. I wrote a blog post about my experience and got a huge outpouring of support from friends and strangers.
So one of the most important things I learned through this experience is that memories are data too. Memories are such important pieces of our medical stories that really shouldn't be left out. And right now, our medical stories are mostly contained within the boundaries of our medical records. And although electronic medical records hold such promise, and I think they'll transform the way we receive medical care, those stories are still told from the perspective of the medical system. And self-tracking is an awesome way to learn about your behaviors and make changes in your life. I think there's an opportunity to add some of this historical and memory data onto the hard data we're collecting through self-tracking for even richer insights. So overall, I think there's a great opportunity to empower patients to assemble, own, and visualize their medical stories. And if we can do this, I think we can help patients like me take control, gain a new self-awareness, and hopefully even change their own behavior. Thanks.
So, you know, I find this fascinating. We worked a little bit together to write some stuff for the Quantified Self website. And in hearing you speak about it now in person, it really speaks to me and to about how you're talking about things in the story format. And at our conference, we had some people talk about self-tracking as a new kind of anthropology. Where do you see yourself going forward with this? Are you going to continue, or you said you built it through memory, so are you going to be using more objective measures or doing anything else to build a better timeline, or is this going to stay the same, do you think?
That's a really good question. So I have been self-tracking, obviously, as well. And I kind of see that as a separate thing, the daily sort of behavioral self-tracking. To me, this is like a way of presenting my entire medical history to a doctor in an effort to just communicate better with them. So I have been updating it when I'm going to see a new doctor. So I'll, the night before, just kind of add a little bit on the timeline and just see how I'm doing, add a few notes. So that's really been its purpose for me. I think it would be awesome to try and incorporate some of that daily self-tracking data into it if possible. I think the challenge is visualizing that and not having it be too busy.
Gotcha. So let's, we have microphones all over the place. There's some physicians in the room I know that work with patients all the time. Do you want to see your patients make these type of graphs and bring them into your offices? Do you not? I found it fascinating that you asked them, did this help you? I mean, how many times is a physician being asked that by a patient? So let's have some questions for Katy.
Katy, hi. I'm Paul Moniz with Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I'm not a doctor, but I have a question for you. Many patients might find this interesting, but don't have a background in design. They probably would come up with something quite crude and wouldn't be able to translate it into something that a doctor would find helpful. Any advice for them?
That's a really great question, and when I first posted this online, I got the same question from people. I don't know of a tool that would help people do this if they don't have any sort of design or background. I would love to make that, and that's kind of my ultimate goal. But in the meantime, I mean, I think even pencil and paper and a little bit of color can go a long way. Even just making a timeline, sketching out, and just, I think that can help people tell their story. I don't think you have to be an artist to do it.
Okay, thanks, Katy.
Yeah.
Michael Kronstadt, thank you. Have you ever had a doctor who changed, who was dismissive or uninterested at first, but you were able to convince that this was a useful communication tool, or are they just this way or this way?
Honestly, I have jumped doctors a lot. Since I made this, it was only last November. I have only shown it to doctors one time each. And that's usually the first time I see them. So for me, it's sort of a getting up to speed tool. And like I mentioned, some were interested at the time, some weren't so interested. So that's an interesting experiment to kind of bring it back and keep it part of the conversation.
Hi, I'm a medical doctor, so I'm just coming at this from that point of view. But I think one of the issues that you might be coming across is the way that doctors have in their head a routine for going through a history and an examination. And it's not done on a visual kind of chart. That's how they don't see the patient like that. So the doctor who's seeing you is probably thinking through his normal processes, and then he's got to then look at a different way of seeing the world, which probably is more useful, but just isn't in his kind of frame of reference for how he's working. So I think some of the problem is going to be educating doctors of how useful it can be to view data like that, because we haven't had the data before, and if you look at a paper record, it's almost impossible to plot data like that. But it's genuinely useful. We plot all sorts of data, in graph format normally. And I think now with new EHRs, they're starting to plot data and plot test results. So I think doctors will start thinking about that in the future, but that might be why they're a bit reticent at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So this visit I was talking about, I went in, I filled out a bunch of paper forms, and then someone typed that into a computer. And so he did have an idea of what I was coming in, what my complaints were. So he had his own system. It just couldn't capture as much data as I was trying to present him in this whole graph.
So I've been thinking, part of this our show and tells is this that I find fascinating is this last question of what did you learn? So as you were going through the process of both making this and then showing this to people in the medical profession, what came out that you didn't think was there? Were you surprised by any correlations between data, or were you like, well, I know all of this stuff, so nothing was surprising?
I think the biggest surprise was the August as a difficult time for me. I knew that there were times when I had double vision and I had to take medication for it, but I didn't realize that it was actually the second week in August, both times. And then this past August, I noticed I was having a hard time again. So that was something that I had no idea about until I just put it down on this timeline and could visually kind of check out my trends. It was a huge surprise, and it definitely kind of made me much more careful this year.
All right.
Yeah.
So any other questions from the audience? All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.